Have you ever woken from a dream so vivid that your heart raced, your breath caught, and for a fleeting moment, you questioned if it was more than just a dream? My name is Selim Thorne, and my life revolves around sound, capturing it, manipulating it, unraveling its mysteries. Sound is my craft, my obsession. But this story isn't about my work. It's about something darker. One night, I had a dream so visceral, so disturbingly real, that it shattered the thin line between sleep and reality. When I woke up, trembling and drenched in cold sweat, the echoes of a place I had never seen reverberated in my mind. What happened next shook everything I thought I understood about dreams, reality, and the shadowy space where they overlap. Before we plunge into this chilling tale, I need one thing from you. Subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. If you're someone brave enough to face the darkest corners of the unknown, this is your place. Here, we explore stories that blur the line between fact and fiction, dreams and nightmares, reality and the unimaginable. If you're ready to confront your fears and dive headfirst into the shadows, your journey begins now. Let's step into the unknown together, where the rules of reality bend and fear becomes tangible. In my dream, I found myself at the mouth of a cavern, a jagged, yawning chasm in the earth that exhaled damp, icy air laced with whispers. It wasn't just darkness inside, it was alive, breathing, pulsing with an energy that set my nerves on edge. The air carried voices, distorted and faint, pleading yet incomprehensible, like echoes of ancient despair. The cavern called to me, not with words, but with a pull so strong that I couldn't resist. My fear screamed for me to turn back, but an unseen force dragged me forward, deeper into the abyss. Every step into the cavern felt like crossing an invisible threshold, leaving behind everything familiar and safe. The air thickened, pressing against my skin like a suffocating weight. The jagged walls were etched with unnatural patterns that pulsed faintly, as if they were veins in some living organism. As I ventured further, the whispers swelled, harmonizing with the relentless pounding of my heart. I tried to stop, to turn back, but my body betrayed me, moving forward as if under someone else's control. Then came the suffocating fear, the kind that sinks its claws into your soul and refuses to let go. I felt eyes on me, watching from the darkness, their gaze piercing and malevolent. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, moving with a predatory grace. The cavern wasn't just a place, it was alive, and it knew I was there. Suddenly, the dream's unsettling rhythm shattered with a scream, a guttural, otherworldly wail that reverberated endlessly through the cavern. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. The scream tore through me, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt like the world had stopped. I wanted to run, to wake up, to escape, but I was frozen. The cavern consumed me, and the last thing I saw was a faint, flickering light deep within its depths. It pulsed like a heartbeat, beckoning me forward. Then a whisper, a voice low and deliberate, speaking my name. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, wrapping around me like a cold shroud. In that moment, the dream ended. I woke up gasping for air, but the echoes, the whispers, and the fear, they followed me back into the waking world. This was only the beginning. That dream wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was a gateway, a prelude to something far darker than I could have ever anticipated. What lies within the cavern? What do those voices want? And why do I feel like I didn't wake up alone? Join me as we unravel the haunting mystery of the echoing cave, a place where nightmares are only the beginning. It began on a night so unremarkable that it should have been forgotten. But when I closed my eyes, I was pulled into a dream so vivid, so disturbingly real, that it branded itself into my memory. In the dream, I stood at the mouth of a cavern, its entrance yawning wide like the maw of a beast. A cold wind whispered from within, carrying a faint, metallic scent that clung to my skin and filled my lungs. The darkness beyond wasn't empty. It pulsated, alive with an energy that made the hairs on my arms rise. Though I had never seen this place before, an undeniable familiarity rooted me to the spot, as if I had been there in another life or another time. The air was heavy, oppressive, and carried a strange resonance. It wasn't silence, it was a hum, low and rhythmic, almost imperceptible but undeniably there. My ears strained to place it, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I took a hesitant step forward, and the ground beneath my feet gave way to a texture that felt disturbingly wrong. It wasn't dirt or rock, it was soft, spongy, almost organic, as though the cavern floor was breathing in unison with the hum. Each step felt like a violation, as though I was intruding on something that did not want me there. As I moved deeper into the cavern, the hum shifted, growing louder, more defined, until it became a cacophony of whispers. At first, the words were indistinct, a swirling mass of sound. But as I strained to listen, fragments began to emerge. My name, spoken softly, repeated again and again, growing louder with each repetition. The whispers were not welcoming. They were sharp, invasive, like cold fingers clawing at the edges of my mind. I turned to look behind me, convinced that someone, or something, was following, but the entrance to the cavern was gone. Only darkness stretched out in every direction. The further I ventured, the more the cavern revealed its sinister nature. The walls were no longer stone but covered in strange, jagged markings that glowed faintly with an eerie blue light. The glow flickered as if mimicking a heartbeat, and the symbols seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, their jagged edges twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. I reached out, compelled to touch one of the markings, and as my fingers brushed its surface, the whispers stopped. Silence fell, thick and suffocating, and for a brief moment, I thought the dream had ended. Then came the sound, a single, piercing scream that erupted from the depths of the cavern. It was not human, it was raw, guttural, filled with rage and agony, and it reverberated through the space, making the ground beneath me tremble. The walls seemed to close in, the air pressing against my chest as though the cavern itself was alive and angry. I stumbled backward, desperate to flee, but my feet refused to move. I was trapped, held in place by an unseen force, as the scream faded into an unbearable silence. In that silence, something began to emerge from the shadows ahead. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, stepped into the faint blue light. Its skin was pale and translucent, its eyes hollow voids that seemed to devour the light around them. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as though savoring my terror. I tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came from my lips. The figure extended a hand, its fingers unnaturally long and claw-like, and pointed toward me. In that moment, I knew it wasn't just a dream. I was being watched, judged, by something far beyond my understanding. As the figure stepped closer, the cavern itself seemed to shudder, and the hum returned, louder, angrier. It built to a deafening crescendo, and just as the figure reached for me, the world around me shattered like glass. I woke up gasping for air, my heart hammering in my chest, but the terror didn't fade. The whispers still echoed in my ears, and the metallic scent lingered in my nose. What was that place? And why does it feel like it's waiting for me to return? This wasn't just a dream. It was an invitation, or perhaps a warning. But what terrifies me most is that deep down, I know I'll go back. Dreams like this don't just end. They pull you deeper, piece by piece, until you're too far gone to escape. The cavern stretched before me, vast and unending, swallowing any semblance of light. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, doubling back on themselves as if the cavern was mocking my every move. The whispers returned, fragmented and fleeting, slipping into my ears and retreating just as quickly. They carried words I couldn't understand, a language that felt ancient and wrong, like hearing a melody played backward. Each syllable clawed at the edges of my mind, leaving behind an icy residue of fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cavern wasn't just alive but aware of me, my movements, my thoughts. As I moved deeper, the walls began to close in, narrowing until the space felt suffocating. The glowing markings on the stone became more vivid, pulsating in erratic rhythms. They seemed to respond to my presence, flickering brighter with each breath I took. The air was dense, saturated with a metallic tang that coated my tongue and clung to my throat. I stumbled forward, my body heavy, as if the cavern's oppressive atmosphere was sinking into my bones. The whispers shifted, transforming into faint laughter, mocking, cruel, and chillingly human. Suddenly, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darted across the far wall, its shape indistinct but undeniably there. My pulse quickened, and I turned sharply, but there was nothing, only the wavering glow of the carvings. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I pressed forward, drawn by the faint light flickering deeper within the cavern. The ground beneath my feet began to change. What had once been a spongy, organic texture now felt sharp and jagged. My soles scraped against the uneven surface, and I realized I was walking on fragments of bones, small, splintered pieces that crunched with each step. A sudden sound shattered the uneasy silence, a deep, guttural growl that reverberated through the cavern. It wasn't an animal, it was something far more primal, a sound that carried an ancient rage. My heart pounded in my chest as the shadows around me seemed to thicken, pressing closer, suffocating me. The glow of the carvings intensified, casting erratic, dancing patterns on the walls that seemed to come alive. The shapes twisted into grotesque faces, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes hollow voids that followed my every move. Ahead, I saw a door, or rather, the semblance of one. It was carved directly into the rock, its surface etched with symbols that pulsed with a sickly green light. The whispers grew louder, merging into a dissonant chorus that seemed to emanate from the door itself. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but something beyond my control urged me forward. My hand trembled as I reached for the door, the air around it vibrating with a low, thrumming energy. The moment my fingers brushed the surface, the whispers stopped, plunging the cavern into a deafening silence. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought I had escaped whatever nightmare this was. But then the door creaked open, revealing a blinding light that poured out in thick, pulsing waves. I stepped inside, shielding my eyes, and felt an immediate drop in temperature. The air was so cold it burned, searing my lungs with each breath. As my vision adjusted, I saw the room was empty, except for one thing. In the center of the space stood a pedestal, and atop it rested an object shrouded in shadows. I couldn't make out its shape, but it radiated a dark energy that sent chills through my body. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from the object itself. The shadows in the room began to move, coalescing into forms that flickered at the edge of my vision. I knew I should run, scream, wake up, but I couldn't. My body refused to obey, as if the cavern had taken control of my will. The room felt alive, breathing in sync with the dark object at its center. A single voice emerged from the whispers, sharp and commanding, speaking a word I couldn't understand but felt in my very core. The shadows lunged toward me, and everything went black. When I woke, I was back in my bed, gasping for air, my chest heaving as if I had been drowning. But the fear didn't leave me. My hands trembled, and the metallic scent from the cavern still lingered on my skin. This wasn't just a dream. Something had followed me back, and it wasn't done with me yet. The chamber was suffocating, alive with a sinister energy that pulsed like a second heartbeat in the air around me. The pedestal at the center held an object shrouded in unnatural darkness, as though the light dared not touch it. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back, to run, but my feet moved forward as if I were a puppet, pulled by invisible strings. My breaths were shallow, each one accompanied by the cold, sharp sting of the icy air. The whispers that had accompanied me through the cavern were gone now, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against my ears, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When I finally reached the pedestal, I hesitated. The object resting atop, it was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was a small, jagged orb, seemingly carved from obsidian, but its surface shifted and writhed like a liquid trapped in solid form. Strange runes etched into its surface glowed faintly, pulsating in a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. I could feel it pulling me closer, an almost magnetic force that seemed to reach into my mind, filling it with fragmented images, shattered faces, crumbling landscapes, and endless darkness. As I extended a trembling hand toward the orb, a sound cut through the silence, a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from every corner of the chamber. My hand froze midair, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The growl deepened, transforming into a chorus of voices that overlapped and intertwined, their tone dripping with malice. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but the intent behind the words was clear. A warning, a threat, or perhaps a curse. The shadows around me began to shift, coalescing into forms that defied logic. They were humanoid but grotesquely distorted, their limbs unnaturally elongated and their faces twisted into expressions of anguish and rage. Their hollow eyes locked onto me, and though they made no sound, their presence screamed into my mind, filling it with an overwhelming sense of dread. My legs refused to move, rooted to the spot as the figures closed in, circling me like predators preparing to strike. The chamber trembled, the ground beneath me cracking and splitting as if the cavern itself were alive and enraged. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, drowning out the growls and filling the air with a deafening cacophony. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was about to collapse. But then, amidst the chaos, the orb pulsed with a blinding light, and the shadows recoiled as if burned. In that moment, I felt a surge of courage, or perhaps desperation, and I reached out, my fingers brushing against the orb's surface. The instant I made contact, the world around me shattered. The chamber disappeared, replaced by a swirling void of darkness and light. I was weightless, spinning uncontrollably, as images flashed before me. Glimpses of the cavern's past, of rituals performed in its depths, and of figures consumed by the very darkness they had sought to control. Then, from the void, a figure emerged. It was the same grotesque entity I had seen before, impossibly tall, its skeletal frame wrapped in shadows that moved like smoke. Its hollow eyes burned with an unnatural light, and when it spoke, its voice was a symphony of terror, 1,000 voices layered together, each one dripping with venom. It whispered my name, stretching each syllable as if savoring the sound, and I felt its presence pierce into my mind, searching, probing, consuming. "You should not have come here," it said, the words reverberating through my skull like a physical blow. "Now you belong to us." The shadows surged forward, enveloping me in their cold embrace. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. My vision darkened, and the last thing I saw before everything went black was the orb, its light flickering like a dying star. When I woke, I was back in my bed, but something was wrong. My room felt different, the air heavier, colder. The faint scent of damp earth and metal lingered, and my ears buzzed with a low hum that hadn't been there before. The dream, if it was a dream, had left something behind, something I couldn't escape. I looked down at my hand and froze. There, etched into my palm, was one of the runes from the orb, glowing faintly in the dark. I wasn't alone. Something had followed me back, something that wasn't done with me yet. The morning after the dream was suffocating. I woke drenched in sweat, my body trembling as though it had been through a physical ordeal. But it wasn't just the lingering fear that unsettled me. It was the feeling that something had changed. The air in my room felt heavy, almost oppressive, and a faint metallic scent hung in the stillness, the same scent from the cavern. I brushed it off as remnants of the nightmare, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something from the dream had followed me into the waking world. Determined to shake the unease, I distracted myself with work. But as the day wore on, strange things began to happen. At first, it was subtle, whispers at the edge of my hearing, too faint to discern but impossible to ignore. Objects in my apartment felt slightly out of place, as if someone had been there while I wasn't looking. My phone flickered inexplicably, its screen displaying symbols I couldn't recognize before abruptly shutting off. The runic pattern etched into my palm, something I had initially dismissed as a figment of my imagination, was still there, faintly glowing in the dark whenever I looked at it. I decided to search for answers, driven by the need to understand what was happening to me. I turned to the internet, scouring forums, articles, and obscure threads for any mention of a cavern that matched what I had seen in my dream. To my shock, I found fragments of stories, scattered across time and continents, about a place known as the Echoing Cave. Each account was eerily similar to my own. People drawn to a cavern in their dreams, only to wake with vivid memories and strange marks on their bodies. Some claimed they heard voices for weeks after, others described symbols that appeared in their homes, and a few, chillingly, had simply vanished without a trace. The most unsettling discovery was a local legend tied to a site only a few hours away from where I lived. The legend spoke of an ancient cave deep in the forest, hidden and rarely found, where the air hummed with whispers and the walls pulsed with strange light. According to the stories, those who entered the cave often returned changed, or didn't return at all. Old newspapers referenced missing hikers and strange sightings near the area, and one article described a man who claimed he had been summoned to the cave through his dreams. His description of the markings inside matched the ones I had seen perfectly. I couldn't ignore the connection. The cave in the dream wasn't just a fabrication of my mind. It was real, and it had a presence in the waking world that demanded attention. My curiosity clashed with my fear, but I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. I reached out to locals through message boards, asking for any information about the Echoing Cave. Most responses were dismissive, but one stood out, an email from someone named Victor. He claimed to have visited the cave and warned me not to pursue it. His message was cryptic but chilling. It's not just a place. It's alive, and once it knows you, it never lets go. That night, as I lay in bed, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't words but something far more primal, resonating in my bones and pulling at my thoughts. My sleep was restless, filled with fragmented images of the cave, the glowing orb, and the grotesque figure that had spoken my name. When I woke, the rune on my palm burned faintly, as if it had been seared into my skin anew. On my nightstand, I found a single, jagged rock coated with the same faintly glowing markings from the cavern walls. I hadn't placed it there. I didn't even own anything like it. Panic gripped me as I realized the truth. The cave wasn't calling me, it was reaching out. Every thread I pulled seemed to tighten the connection, drawing me closer to its shadowed depths. The lines between dream and reality were blurring, and with each passing moment, I felt the cavern's presence more strongly, as though it were a predator, stalking me, waiting for the moment to strike. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain. But one thing was clear. The echoing cave wasn't done with me, and I feared the nightmare I thought I had left behind was only just beginning. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The cavern was pulling me back, its whispers growing louder with every passing night. Sleep offered no escape. Each dream was more vivid, more suffocating, dragging me deeper into the darkness. I woke every morning drenched in sweat, the rune on my palm glowing faintly in the pre-dawn gloom. It wasn't just a mark anymore, it was a brand, a tether that tied me to the echoing cave. I had no choice. I had to find it. I had to understand what was happening before it consumed me completely. The journey to the cave felt like stepping into a nightmare made flesh. I followed the clues I'd uncovered online, and in the legends whispered by locals, driving deep into an overgrown forest where the light barely penetrated the canopy. The air grew colder the closer I got, carrying a metallic tang that turned my stomach. The path I followed was barely more than a trail, swallowed by vines and shadows that seemed to move in the corners of my vision. I pressed on, my breath fogging in the unnatural chill, until I reached a clearing where the ground seemed to fall away into darkness. The cave. Standing at its entrance, I felt the same suffocating presence I had in the dream. The air hummed faintly, and a low vibration coursed through the ground beneath my feet. The whispers were back, faint at first but growing louder as I stepped inside. They weren't just sounds, they were alive, curling around me like tendrils of smoke, pulling me deeper into the abyss. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, its beam swallowed by the cavern's oppressive blackness. The deeper I ventured, the more the cave transformed. The walls were no longer jagged stone but smooth, pulsing with faint, otherworldly light. The markings I'd seen in my dream were here, etched into the rock, glowing faintly with that same eerie luminescence. The whispers shifted, becoming more distinct. They weren't just random murmurs anymore. They were voices calling my name, pleading, warning, and mocking all at once. I felt their presence pressing against my mind, unraveling my thoughts like threads pulled from a fragile tapestry. Then I saw him. A man, gaunt, his face hollowed by fear and exhaustion, emerged from the shadows ahead. His clothes were torn, his hands trembling as he clutched at the walls for support. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It knows you. It's waiting." He introduced himself as Elias, another wanderer drawn to the echoing cave by dreams he couldn't escape. His eyes darted around nervously, as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness at any moment. He spoke of the cave as though it were alive, describing how it fed on fear, drawing people in and consuming them piece by piece. Elias led me deeper into the cave, though his every step was hesitant, his body tense as if ready to flee at the slightest provocation. He showed me carvings on the walls, ancient symbols that told a story of rituals and sacrifices, of people drawn to the cave through visions and dreams. "It doesn't let go," he said, his voice trembling. "Even if you leave, it follows. It's in you now." As we ventured further, the air grew colder, heavier, until it felt like I was breathing through water. The hum of the cavern intensified, vibrating through my chest, and the whispers became deafening. The shadows around us began to shift, coalescing into shapes that danced just beyond the reach of my flashlight. They weren't human, elongated, twisted forms that seemed to writhe and shudder with every step we took. I could feel their eyes on me, their silent presence pressing against my mind like a weight I couldn't escape. Elias stopped abruptly, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. "It's here," he whispered, barely audible over the cacophony of whispers and hums. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and ran, his footsteps echoing down the passageway until they faded into silence. I was alone. The cavern seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing in time with the whispers. Ahead, a faint light flickered, drawing me forward despite every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The floor beneath my feet felt soft and spongy, as though I were walking on something alive. The light grew brighter, revealing a massive chamber that opened up before me, its ceiling disappearing into darkness. In the center stood an altar, and atop it was the object I'd seen in my dreams. The orb, glowing faintly with that sickly green light, its surface shifting and alive. The whispers stopped abruptly, plunging the chamber into a silence so absolute it rang in my ears. The orb pulsed, its light intensifying, and I felt its pull stronger than ever. My hands trembled as I stepped closer, unable to resist its magnetic draw. As I reached for it, the shadows around the chamber surged forward, their forms twisting and writhing into something monstrous. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the chamber, and a voice, deep, ancient, and dripping with malice, spoke from the darkness. "You were warned. Now you are ours." My scream was swallowed by the cavern, leaving me alone in the suffocating blackness, consumed by the cave's relentless hunger. The chamber swallowed me whole, its sheer vastness reducing me to an insignificant speck. The air was thick, vibrating with an otherworldly hum that rattled my chest and sent tremors through the ground beneath my feet. The orb on the altar glowed brighter with each step I took, its surface writhing as though alive. Shadows danced on the walls, their twisted forms mocking my every move. Despite the terror gripping my chest, I couldn't stop. My feet moved forward as if compelled by an unseen force, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the altar, the orb seemed to react to my presence. Its glow intensified, the sickly green light pulsating like a heartbeat. I hesitated, my hand hovering just above its surface, but the cavern had other plans. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices shouting, pleading, and screaming all at once. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet their intent was clear. They were warning me, or perhaps taunting me, daring me to touch the artifact. The moment my fingers brushed the orb, the world exploded into chaos. A deafening roar filled the chamber, drowning out the whispers as the ground beneath me cracked and split. Shadows surged forward, twisting and writhing into monstrous shapes. They weren't just figures, they were entities, their forms defying logic and reality. Elongated limbs stretched impossibly far, their faces void of features save for hollow, burning eyes that seemed to pierce straight into my soul. Then it appeared, the figure from my dreams, stepping from the shadows as if emerging from the cavern itself. It was impossibly tall, its skeletal frame shrouded in a shifting, smoke-like darkness. Its hollow eyes burned with an unnatural light, and its presence carried an overwhelming weight that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. It raised a hand, long and claw-like, and pointed directly at me. When it spoke, its voice was a symphony of terror, deep, guttural, and layered with countless other voices. "You came seeking answers," it said, the words vibrating through the chamber, "but you are not prepared for the truth." The orb on the altar began to shift, its surface bubbling and contorting until it split open like a grotesque flower. From within, a torrent of light and shadow spilled forth, illuminating the chamber in a sickly glow. The light didn't bring clarity, it revealed horrors. Carvings on the walls twisted and came alive, depicting scenes of sacrifices, rituals, and a darkness consuming all who dared to enter. The whispers returned, but now they weren't random. They were calling me by name, over and over, each voice filled with an almost reverent malice. The figure gestured toward the orb, and suddenly, the memories came flooding back. Fragmented images of the cavern filled my mind. People lost in its depths, their faces frozen in terror, hands outstretched, reaching for salvation that never came. Among them, I saw my own reflection, distorted, trapped, screaming silently as the shadows consumed me. This wasn't just a cavern. It was a living entity, a predator that fed on fear and despair. And it had been watching me long before I ever set foot inside. "You are chosen," the figure said, its voice slicing through the chaos. "Your fear nourishes us. Your soul belongs to the echoing cave." Before I could react, the shadows surged toward me, their cold tendrils wrapping around my limbs and pulling me toward the altar. The orb pulsed violently, and the runes on its surface began to burn with a searing intensity. Pain shot through my body as the rune on my palm glowed brighter, connecting me to the artifact. My screams were swallowed by the cavern, echoing back at me in distorted, mocking tones. In that moment of despair, I realized I had a choice, though neither option felt like salvation. I could give in, let the cavern take me, or I could fight, even if it meant risking whatever shred of humanity I had left. Summoning every ounce of strength, I reached out and grabbed the orb. Its surface burned my skin, but I held on, feeling its power surge through me like a raging current. The cavern roared in fury, the walls trembling as the shadows recoiled. The figure stepped closer, its hollow eyes narrowing. "You cannot escape," it hissed. "You are ours." But I didn't let go. The pain was excruciating, but I focused on the light within the orb, the faint flicker of something that felt like hope. With a final, desperate scream, I hurled the orb against the ground. It shattered with a deafening explosion, releasing a blinding light that consumed everything around me. When the light faded, I found myself lying on the ground outside the cave. The forest was eerily silent, the air still and heavy. My body ached, and the rune on my palm was gone, replaced by a faint scar. The cave's entrance had collapsed, buried beneath tons of rubble. But even as I sat there, gasping for air, I knew it wasn't over. The shadows were still with me, lingering at the edges of my vision. And the whispers, soft and distant now, were a reminder that the echoing cave wasn't done with me yet. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the forest anymore. The suffocating darkness of the cave was gone, replaced by the sterile white walls of a hospital room. The hum of medical machines filled the air, punctuated by the steady beeping of a heart monitor. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest as I tried to sit up. A nurse entered the room, startled to see me awake. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, her voice kind but tinged with confusion. "You were found near an old cave collapse, unconscious and covered in bruises. No one knows how you got out." I didn't know either. My memories of those final moments in the cave were a blur, a swirling mix of light, shadows, and the echo of that monstrous voice declaring me chosen. My hand instinctively moved to my palm, but the rune was gone, replaced by a faint scar that burned when I thought too long about the cave. The whispers were gone, too, but the silence they left behind was even more unsettling. It felt like the calm before a storm, as if something was waiting, watching. As the days passed, I tried to convince myself it was over. The nightmare subsided, the whispers didn't return, and the world outside felt blissfully mundane. But the signs began to appear, subtle at first. A faint metallic smell in the air that no one else seemed to notice. Shadows that moved unnaturally at the corners of my vision, too quick to catch but too deliberate to ignore. Then there were the symbols, etched faintly into the frost on my bathroom mirror, scrawled in dust on the window of my car, even appearing on the walls of my apartment. Always the same runes from the cave, faint but unmistakable. And then there were the voices. They started as faint murmurs, easy to dismiss as tricks of the mind. But they grew louder, more insistent, calling my name in the dead of night. I tried to record them, desperate for proof that I wasn't losing my mind, but the playback was always silent. It was as though they existed only for me, a private torment that no one else could hear. One night, I woke to find the scar on my palm glowing faintly in the darkness. The air in my room was heavy, oppressive, and the metallic scent was stronger than ever. I turned on the light, but the shadows seemed to resist it, clinging to the corners of the room like living things. And then I saw it, the symbol from the cave, etched into the wall above my bed, pulsating with that same sickly green light. My chest tightened as the whispers surged, louder and clearer than ever before. "You thought you escaped," they hissed, the voices blending into a singular, guttural tone. "But the cave is in you now." The next morning, I tried to act normal, but the unease was impossible to hide. I researched the echoing cave again, hoping for answers, but the reports had changed. Articles that once described its collapse were gone, replaced by new ones that claimed the cave had never existed. Even the locals who once spoke of it denied any knowledge. It was as though the cave had been erased from reality, leaving only its mark on me. I started noticing connections to my past that I'd long forgotten. Strange dreams I'd had as a child, always of dark tunnels and whispering voices. Old sketches I'd drawn in notebooks, eerily similar to the carvings on the cave walls. Family stories of an ancestor who disappeared during an expedition into a cave centuries ago. It was as if the echoing cave had always been part of me, waiting for the right moment to pull me in. The nights grew worse. The shadows in my apartment became bolder, taking on distorted forms that hovered just out of reach. The whispers became relentless, invading my waking hours, their words now distinct but incomprehensible. The rune on my palm began to ache, its faint scar burning like fire whenever I was alone. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling was undeniable. The cave hadn't let me go. It had simply followed me, embedding itself into my reality like a parasite. The final straw came one night when I woke to find myself standing at the edge of my bed, staring at the wall where the symbol had appeared. My hand was outstretched, tracing the runes in the air as if compelled by an unseen force. The whispers were deafening, their tone no longer mocking but demanding. "Come back," they said. "You belong with us. I don't know what will happen next." The cave's presence is stronger every day, its pull more irresistible. It's as if it's waiting for me to make a choice, a decision that will either end this nightmare or seal my fate forever. If you've made it this far, you probably have your own theories. Was it all in my head? Did I truly escape, or am I still trapped in the cave, reliving its horrors over and over? And what does the symbol mean, this mark that ties me to something I can't begin to understand? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever experienced anything like this, share your story. Maybe together we can piece together the truth. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you want to hear more tales from the edge of reality. Because sometimes the nightmares don't end when you wake up. And the echoing cave? It's still out there, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to find it.